A medical examiner is an appointed person. They have a required educational requirement that the county can set up for that individual, and there's no term. So we're a medical examiner county, so I can keep my job as long as I'm doing a good job, whereas a coroner is an appointed official. So they are elected. They need to be over the age of 18, a resident of the county, and receive one more vote than their opponent. There's no education requirements or any other type of background requirement, and then they serve 4-year terms. So every 4 years, they need to go through the election process again. So some of the surrounding counties are still coroner systems, and they're slowly starting to transition into medical examiner systems, so the county can choose whoever they decide is the most fitted person. But coroners and medical examiners serve the same function. So medical examiners and coroners are state mandated positions. So we operate under Wisconsin State Statute 979. So each state and county is set up different. So how we do death investigation is completely different than how they do it in Florida compared to how they do it in Lane County compared to how they do it in Dane County. So there's no standardization as to how death investigation needs to be done. We are working as a Wisconsin Coroner Medical Examiner Association to set up more guidelines and regulations in Wisconsin, but as a nation, everything is set up different, how the different rules and regulations work.
Are there pluses or negatives to that, or why is it so varied?
It just depends on, some places are a little more progressive than others. Some, for example, Florida regionalizes, so they have 5 different regions where they have a regional medical examiner's office that is run by a forensic pathologist, and they cover that area. Some areas have it where law enforcement acts as a medical examiner or coroner, which a lot of law enforcement agencies don't have the medical background. We're dealing with natural deaths, and also there's conflict of interest if there's an officer involved shooting or something else where they're investigating their own agency. So another big thing is that there's also some areas that they have funeral directors as their primary death investigators, which again, you have another big conflict of interest, having a funeral director showing up at a home to do the investigation, because it's an easy way for that to sway that family into choosing their particular funeral home. So there is a lot of benefits to having more standardized, and also right now in Wisconsin, there's no formalized things of saying you should do these cases at autopsies, these ones you should do medical record reviews, and what needs to be done. So having a little bit more standardization would definitely improve the professionalism of death investigation. So our job is to determine the cause and manner of death for anyone who dies suddenly, unexpected, or someone who does not die underneath the care of a physician. So even an elderly person who might have a lot of medical history, if they die at their home and not at a hospital or a nursing home under hospice care, that becomes an investigation for us. And we have to investigate anything that involves an injury or any type of poisoning. So any accidental deaths, any suicides, any homicides, or undetermined deaths, or deaths where we really don't know what caused it. So for causes of death, there's a million, yes.
So say somebody gets murdered, would the police call a medical examiner or a coroner?
Yep, so we would be right there with the police doing the investigation. So for cause of death, there's a million causes of death. That is just pretty much what actually led to that person dying. So it could be acute myocardial infarction, meaning a heart attack, due to coronary artery disease, due to hypertension, hyperlipidemia, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, due to their obesity, or a heroin toxicity, due to acute and chronic polysubstance abuse. So the manners of death, there's 5 we can choose from. They are natural, accidental, suicide, homicide, and undetermined. Sometimes the cause of death is very clear. You have someone who dies of a gunshot wound. But now the manner gets a little bit more difficult. Did that person purposely shoot themselves to commit suicide, which would be a suicide ruling? Or were they cleaning the gun and it misfired, where it's an accidental? Or did someone shoot them and made it look like a suicide, where it would be a homicide? Or do we really not have enough information to determine what happened in that particular situation? It would be an undetermined. Sometimes when we have different types of overdoses, it can be a challenge as well, given if someone decides to commit suicide by taking an excessive amount of pain medications that people also use as abuse. So sometimes the manner of death can be very challenging to determine compared to the cause of death, which can be clear-cut. to become a medical examiner coroner, there's no formalized training programs anywhere in the U.S. They are starting to pop up a few associate degree death investigation programs, but they're few and far between. NTC is looking into having a program developed here. However, I have been extremely busy and not able to help them. Maybe in the future years we would be able to offer something like that in our area. But like I said, each county is set up differently with different requirements that we went over. However, usually it's registered nurses, EMTs, paramedics, or retired law enforcement officers, sometimes physicians as well. Currently in Wisconsin, if you have a population of over 500,000 for your county, you are state mandated to have a forensic pathologist as your medical examiner, and we're currently trying to get that switched over in Marathon County and have a forensic pathologist as our medical examiner. The only standardized testing or certification we can have as death investigators is American Board of Medical Legal Death Investigation certification, which all of our full-time staff, 4 of us, are all certified, and we're working on getting all of our on-call staff certified. So that is something that we are doing.
What's the class that you guys go over to Appleton and look at that forensics? What, isn't that like one of the techs over there?
Yeah, that's Fox
The
Family.
Fox Valley Technical Institute?
So in Marathon County, for my position as the medical examiner, you need to have either a bachelor's or a master's degree. I have a master's degree in forensic nursing with an emphasis in death investigation. So the chief deputy and deputy medical examiners have to have either an associate degree or a bachelor's degree in a health-related field. Most of our staff are either registered nurses or paramedics. That is something that I've found over the years is the easiest to train, just because they have a really good knowledge of the disease process, medications, and the overall health history. It's easier to train the forensic side and a little bit of the investigation side than the entire medical side of everything. So in our office, we have 1 full-time medical examiner, which is myself. We have 1 full-time chief deputy. We have 2 full-time deputy medical examiners, and we actually increased our on-call staff last month to 6 on-call deputy medical examiners. Our on-call staff just covers the midnight to 8 a.m. and weekends and holidays for our office, but besides that, the full-time staff cover all other times. So our office operates 24/7. Regardless of weekends, nights, holidays, whatever else is going on, even if you have a big case going on, that doesn't mean that you don't have other deaths happening at that same time. That we've had many situations where we had 2 or 3 deaths going on at the same time, all in different areas of the county, so it's a struggle to try to coordinate being in 3 different places at once. So conducting death investigations. So when we're notified of a death, we are always called from dispatch, where they provide an address and minimal information. We might just be told, we have a 72-year-old male who is found down by his wife located at this address, and that's all we know. Sometimes we don't even know that. Sometimes they just say, we have a death, I don't know much about it, so we are going in blind. When we get to the scene, we're always briefed by law enforcement or detectives. We need to know the demographic information of the decedent, if it's known, so just their name, their date of birth, their address, basic information, a brief history provided by witnesses or families, just letting us know what was going on surrounding the death, their past history, and then initial scene observation on what they're seeing at the scene and kind of what their impression is of the case of the death. And then we also need to know the location and condition of the decedent, just so we're aware of what's going in, such as, does a person have extensive injuries to them, or have they been dead for a prolonged period of time, or they have extensive postmortem changes, and then any concerns that the law enforcement officer or detective has regarding the death. Okay.
Like, so there's times you walk in and it's like, ooh, that really stinks pretty good.
Oh, yeah, there's times when you'd be amazed that we have a lot of hoarders in Marathon County. I would never imagine how people live. It is unbelievable. Houses that look beautiful on the outside have garbage this high. That one person, the worst one I've ever been in, took the law enforcement officers an hour to clear up like a 1-foot path up the stairs, and he did not have running water for 15 years, so he was using the bathroom in bottles and bags and stashing it throughout his apartment, and he was dead for a month. So that was very, very unpleasant. I still am traumatized when I drive by that house. That's all you remember. So there's that's an extreme case, but There's situations where the decedent's been dead for a prolonged period of time, or the housing conditions are atrocious and you wonder how people can truly live like that. So be very grateful, even if your house isn't perfect, you are fantastic housekeepers and keep it that way. So initial information and scene observations. When we get to the scene, we do a complete walkthrough of the scene just to see if there's anything out of place in what we're observing. We photograph the scene. We try to photograph all rooms of the residence. Sometimes there's situations we're unable to, such as if there's a large family there, we're not going to make everyone move out of a particular room that had nothing to do with the death. If it is a suspicious scene, no one's allowed in the house at that time. They would be asked to leave. We look for anything out of place or concerning as we're doing the walkthrough to see if there's anything that could help us determine what happened with that person's death. And we ensure the scene matches the history provided. We interview witnesses. We want to know the last 24 hours, the past medical, social, and mental health history of that person, and also the circumstances surrounding the death. Yes?
When you say that if it's a suspicious scene and you ask them to leave, how long could you say that area is suspicious? Say they live there, would you guys put them up in a hotel or
Yep, law enforcement does. So if we have a suspected homicide and law enforcement is the one, we don't do any of that. They have to remove the family and people from the scene. There's times when they're displaced for 3-4 days waiting for autopsy results to come back or something else to come in where they're holding down the scene just to make sure there's nothing else we need for evidence. So it happens. It's not very often it happens, but it does happen maybe once or twice a year.
So when you, let's say you arrive and you walk in or get to the scene, the law enforcement will say they might have an idea of possible homicide or natural death or whatever. So they sort of give you the heads up what their feelings are, or do you walk in and say, yeah, this is definitely
Yep, we work
homicide?
closely together. So as we're going through the scene, what's really nice with working with law enforcement, with us having a medical background and them having a criminal justice background, is we see things a little differently. Perfect examples, we had deaths before with someone who has esophageal varices, so they're just enlarged veins in the esophagus, and sometimes they rupture and you have blood everywhere. It could look like a horrific crime scene or something happened. However, we know that it's a natural process and it's nothing suspicious. Where law enforcement sees this and sees, oh, I think that they probably were shot or something's going on, I'm really suspicious of this. Or we go in and say, no, he's a chronic alcoholic, he has this history, this is what it is, and it's nothing suspicious. So having that two sets of eyes, law enforcement is also more of an expert on guns than what we are. I don't shoot guns. I know enough about guns to do my job, but I'm not an expert in guns. Where it's nice to have them on scenes, or when you're looking at a suspicious shooting victim, where you can say, well, how this projectile falls and how this is a gun positioning, this doesn't make sense because of this and this, where we can work together and get a really good comprehensive view of that scene and that person. Yes?
What's the difference between what you do and what a CSI does?
CSI does the scene processing, so they do nothing with the body. So that's usually our crime lab that would do that. So, and trust me, they do not want nothing to do with the body working with them. They just like the actual evidence. So they go to scenes, they photograph everything. They may collect certain evidence, they bring that evidence back to their lab, and then they're able to process that evidence. So check for any fingerprints, check different DNAs, do that sort of thing. Whereas they're not an expert at all when it comes to the body. They have no idea really what they're looking at when it comes to the body. They pretty much just say, I'll help you put the body in the body bag. Don't make me touch the body. You deal with the body, where they deal with the scene.
So what we see on TV is not usually the
Oh, no, our people would never, crime lab people do not like
when
bodies.
you guys watch CSI on TV, I mean, they're doing, they've got it all figured out, but they're not touching. I mean, they're touching and doing everything with the body.
No, so that's kind of like a mix, they're making it more TV based when it's kind of a mix between their job and our job, where it's divided. So we do the body examination. We're not in charge of processing the scene or collecting evidence or anything else. We collect evidence off the body. We might have law enforcement collect medications or other things that help us determine what happened to that person. But our main evidence is the actual physical body, whereas crime lab does everything else but the body. So scene observation. So you never know what you're really walking into until you get there. So here's just some basic pictures of different scenes. So in this corner, if you were to walk into that scene and see that, you think this is very suspicious. There's drawers all out, everything's sitting there, it looks like there was someone rummaging around. I would A, think, was this possibly a burglary, what happened? Or B, was this something staged to make it look like a burglary? So then I would be a lot more suspicious as to the body examination compared to everything nice and tidy. This is a nice clean hoarding house. When I say clean, it's because there's no garbage or anything else around. So sometimes you have very limitations of going to the scene where it's very difficult to get to the body, move the body out, kind of do a thorough investigation. If you look into this scene, there's a lot of blood. So what happened with that blood? Where's the body? Does the body have injuries? Where did that blood come from? Is it consistent to the injuries you're seeing on the body? If you open a drawer and you see that, you think automatic drugs. So of course, if you find that, you would get the drug team and detectives involved if they weren't already there, because you probably have some sort of heroin overdose. Scenes does not matter. People can die anywhere, outside, inside, in stores, hotels, I mean, you name it, we've had cases there. So sometimes you do have decedents outside where you have a lot of environmental factors that affect your processing. And then obviously motor vehicle fatalities, you are on the side of a highway, a rural road, all sorts of places. So it depends on, anyone can die anywhere.
So like this morning, if you had to go on a call this morning, how do you prepare yourself? Because it was, 1 degree this morning. So are you like, let's say they call, something happened, do you leave from your house? Do you go to
So we
back to the office?
We have 3 county-owned vans, and we always have all of our stuff in the van, so we're ready to go at any time of the day or night, because things happen day or night. We always have our winter gear in case if we need it. We have hand warmers, foot warmers, because sometimes I've been outside in negative 30-degree weather for hours on end with dealing with cases when you're freezing cold. You've also been outside in 100-degree weather for long periods of time. You've been in the woods, deep in the woods, hiking to get to someone who was a hunting fatality where you had to walk a mile. So you always have to be prepared for whatever type of environment you're going into. So we have all of our stuff there. We each have our own little it's like actually just a laundry basket that has all of our winter clothes, a change of shoes, whatever else we could potentially need to get to the scene safely. So you have to be a bit ready and available 24/7. So scene documentation, I'll go over all of this in a lot more information, but it's important for us to have positive identification, determine the time of death, and that's most likely from postmortem changes, the location of the body, determine if the body was ever moved, assess the body for medical findings, and identify and document any injuries, and then possibly to figure out what caused those injuries. And then we have to photograph the decedent, so we do overall body photographs, so further away. And I always show my staff, you have to photograph every body the same exact way, from an infant to an elderly person, from a homicide to a 100% natural expected death. You need to have that consistency. So we do overall body photos, then we do closer up general body photos, and then we photograph anything unique to the body or findings such as tattoos, birthmarks, injuries, or other medical findings that is particular to that person, which would be scars, anything like that.
So why is that individual in that white uniform?
That is just a scene thing, so that's a CSI person taking pictures of a homicide, staged homicide scene. So we wear those if there's anything contaminating the scene. Usually for homicides, they don't have us wear the full suit. We have to wear booties, just so we don't bring anything in, gloves. Sometimes if it's a bad boarding house, the body is in less than ideal condition due to postmortem changes, is the way to put it. We would wear those to protect ourselves. I've been in houses before that have bed bug infestations, which is horrific, so you wear that and then you burn whatever you were wearing before so you don't bring that home. Sometimes, like same with, we've had cockroaches in houses before, where really bad cockroach infestations, where you would have to wear that just to make sure you're not bringing anything out and protecting yourself. So for positive identification, it is our responsibility to figure out who that person is. Law enforcement always assists, but at the end of the day, it is our state mandate to do that. So sometimes we're able to do a visual identification, do a photo comparison, typically from a driver's license. That is for only people who don't have extensive trauma, minimal postmortem changes, family saying, yes, this is my loved one, yes, it is your loved one, then we're done. So that is the majority of cases, and it's fairly simple. But sometimes we're not able to identify the body. So if someone has extensive postmortem changes, they're in a horrific car crash, or they were a burn victim, we might not be able to look at the body and say, yes, this is John Smith. So we need to either do dental, which we have a forensic odontologist we work with that does amazing work, where he's able to let us know within 24 hours if that person is who, in fact, who we thought it was. Fingerprint comparison. If the person was ever incarcerated, law enforcement has this nice little electronic fingerprint machine that's able to scan the fingerprint and give us a positive identification on that, which has helped us in the past. DNA, which now takes about a week. In the past, it used to take us 3 months, which is very difficult because we're unable to release the body to the funeral home or loved ones until we have a positive identification, so we have to hold that body for that period of time. Or sometimes others, such as if someone were to have a hip replacement and we do autopsy and we're able to see that the serial number on that particular hip replacement matches the serial number in the medical record, we could use that as a positive identification.
So how do you do the dental?
So the forensic pathologist actually removes the entire jaw and teeth, and that goes to the forensic odontologist who takes multiple x-rays of that and is able to compare it to other dental records. The limitation for dental is you need to have dental records from whoever you think the person was and have a presumptive identity. So if you have someone who you have no idea who this person was, you have no one missing from your area, we've never had that, I don't want that. But if we do, that would probably be DNA, and that would go into the NAMUS system, which is a national missing person database, where anyone who ever goes missing gets put up there. So they have the people who are missing, all of their DNA, dental records, everything we would need to compare. And then they have all the John and Jane Does who do not have an identity yet in that system as well. So if someone comes forward, they could kind of compare different cases. So that's our best bet for an unidentified person. But we would then, in that particular situation, keep the mandible, the jaw bones, and the teeth until that is positively identified, and that would be held on by our forensic pathologist.
So let's say you know it's John Henry. How do you know what dentist he went to? How would you get records from that?
Family interview, talking to family, talking to friends, significant other. Before we had to call, figure out what insurance he was on through employer or something, and then randomly call the dental insurance to see where that person potentially doctored, have to jump through 100 hoops to get that, take hours of time. But we were able to get that, then get the records, then do the positive identification. So we've had those situations before as well when we don't have families, but we know an employer. So it's definitely a lot of creative work. So the next slide contains some graphic photos. Please, if you have a upset stomach or if you don't really like graphic photos, please don't look. They're not that bad, but we've had people.
Last week she had someone pass out.
That was last spring, so.